Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, A Comprehensive and Adaptive Approach to SOC Compliance. For those of you wanting the copy of the slides or recording of today's webinar, not to worry, I'll be sending them to you within 48 hours. Got a few housekeeping items to go through before we get started. You can maximize or minimize the webinar pane during the presentation by using the red, orange arrow buttons. During the webinar, we also encourage you to ask questions. You'll see a questions box that you can use to type in those questions. Just click submit. Our presenters will answer those questions either during the webinar or as time allows toward the end. Now let's look at modifying your audio settings. If you're using a telephone, please click on the phone call audio option. If you're listening through your computer, then please click on the computer audio option. Now a quick review of some CPE requirements. To qualify for CPE, you must use a personal computer, no smartphones, and log in with your own information and unique URL. You must be logged into our online software for at least 50 consecutive minutes within the scheduled time frame of the webinar. Actively respond to at least 75% of the polling questions. There are 4, which means you need to answer 3, and you must complete the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters to do some quick introductions. First up is Liam.
Thank you, Debbie. So, hey everyone, I am Liam Collins. I'm an audit partner here at Armanino. I run our firm's national SOC and HITRUST practice. I've been here a couple of years. Prior to that, I'd spent just over 10 years at the Big Four. And as you can see from this slide, I spent lots of time in college, an attorney, an MBA, which I think qualifies me to be a SOC auditor in life. So I'm looking forward to at least sharing some of the updates here with you guys today.
Thanks, Liam. Hey, once again, I'm JT, and I'm the CEO of nCloud. We are a DevOps consulting company. We help companies to move to cloud, help them with continuous integration and continuous delivery. And in fact, this is how I met Liam and his team. We realized when there's a good automation and process, SOC audits and change management side of things go really smoothly. So I'm really great to be here today. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Mike Campy. I'm a development manager at Armanino. I help clients and organizations address their audit, tax, and consulting needs. I basically function as a client advocate, helping connect people to the services they need to keep compliant and grow their business.
Thanks, gentlemen. Quick review of our learning objectives again for those here for CPE. We're going to review why change management is important when implementing cloud solutions. Discuss some real-life examples of how effective change management can support a comprehensive and adaptive approach to SOC compliance. And then Liam's going to outline some recent changes to SOC 1 and upcoming changes to SOC 2 compliance requirements. And with that, speaking of CPE, we're going to start with our first polling question. How important is change management within your organization? A, very important. B, somewhat important. C, not important at all. Or D, not sure. And again, because I'm going to get this question about 5 times, I will be sending around a copy of the slides and a recording in the webinar within 48 hours. So just listen and absorb today. Get those answers in. We'll close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Good news, it looks like this is a very relevant discussion to the folks here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Liam.
Perfect. So I just want to give some background on this webinar, why we decided to take this approach. So I am going to discuss later on recent updates to the SOC 1, SOC 2 standard. You have SSAE 18 after coming out. You have new SOC 2 requirements coming in next year, and SOC 2 for cybersecurity. So after the change management discussion today with JT, we are going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But just so for some context, JT and I worked together on one of our clients here last year. Change management being a really large concern for clients with respect to SOC compliance, I thought it was very valuable just to get that perspective from him on what his team are doing and maybe some of the best practices that are out there. And from a SOC perspective, we're seeing change management be one of the areas where either our clients or many of my competitors' clients out there in the marketplace are either failing or really struggling to become compliant either for SOC or for any of the other numerous compliance requirements that are out there these days. For example, on the auditing perspective, we're very much focused on how do we get a complete and accurate listing of all the changes out there with respect to application infrastructure changes. How do we ensure developer access to production is very well controlled, and how really are we ensuring that all the changes that are being implemented are properly tested and approved. And I know from a SOC perspective, we can very often spend more time trying to get a complete and accurate listing of those changes than we actually do in testing. And I know from some of my other competitors over my time at the Big Four, especially on large clients, getting this complete and accurate listing of changes is a very challenging endeavor. And very often I've seen this result in clients not pass the audit before we've ever begun. So on the client we shared last year, I was highly impressed with JT and his team. They'd implemented an automated solution that really allowed us to pass this client's audit very quickly in the area of change management. They had some really strong best practices implemented. And I know from our team's perspective, it made our life a heck of a lot easier. And the testing went very, very smoothly. So I think in this area, I'm going to pass it over to JT to give us some background. I think maybe Mike has a couple of questions, and then we'll get moving.
Yeah, I wanted to address our first polling question. We saw from most of the answers that change management is very important to everybody on the webinar today. So JT, can you maybe address what some of the challenges you see organizations face related to change management when they operate in a cloud environment?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So the way cloud environments are managed and operated, this is totally different than on-prem environments. When one of the reasons companies move to the cloud because there's fast provisioning, right? So you don't have to wait for days and months to get resources. You can just make an API call and you can get resources. And when I first started in operation, it used to take us 5 days or sometime a week, sometime a month to provision resources. So cloud pretty much changed all that, and you get resources when you need them. And one of the other things we see in the cloud is you could treat infrastructure as code. That means every developer could just make an API call and get resources. They no longer have to wait for the operation people. And one of the other reasons we see, one of the other great features we see our customers utilizing is the elasticity. You can scale up and down based on your customer requirements, based on your business metrics. So all these makes it very appealing for customers to move to cloud. And some of the things that used to take us a long time, for example, setting up infrastructure in different regions and availability zones, is much more easier than how it used to be. So back to your question, Mike, in the cloud environment, things look totally different because number of resources are really, really high. Because the application's gotten really, really complex because sometimes we're ingesting a lot of data and there are a lot of other resources you end up using for the application. And since you could treat your infrastructure as code, that means developers could have direct access to launch resources, and you have far more people making changes than they used to be in the on-prem environments. And number of operation people, they're still the same. Because you can leverage a lot of automation, so you don't need more people. So that's why change management in cloud environment is actually kind of difficult because it's such a dynamic environment. And some of the tooling, and I apologize if you guys never heard any of these tools before. The point I want to illustrate on this slide is there has been a lot of focus on the tools in the last 3-4 years. These tools like Terraform, CloudFormation, or Ansible, they make it very, very convenient to deploy a large number of resources. You can deploy code multiple times a day. It makes these tools make it super easy to make changes in the infrastructure. So once again, the point I want to illustrate on this in this slide is I like CloudFormation, but if you ask some of my teammates, they might like Terraform. So there are people provisioning resources using different workflows on the cloud.
Thanks, JT. So let's jump into our second polling question. Again, if you're here for CPE, there are 4. So if you missed that first one, you need to make sure you answered this one. Does your organization currently receive a SOC audit? Yes, A. B, no, or C, not sure. And again, for those, if we're going through some technical stuff and you're not quite sure what we're talking about, definitely get those questions in and we'll address them at the end of the presentation as time allows. Get those answers in. We'll close the polls in 3, 2, and 1.
So as I mentioned earlier, that when there are a lot of people making changes, it actually there are some unique challenges that only show up in cloud environment. For example, when you're going through SOC audit, it makes it very, very hard to demonstrate who's making the changes and how the changes are being documented, since pretty much all the developers have their own workflow. And even if you're SOC audit and change management is the biggest challenge, but even if you're going through other compliance audits, and that we see that people are struggling with that as well. And one of the things cloud makes it easy is to provision resources. And one of the reasons you move to cloud because you want to scale up and down based on your business metrics. But we feel like if you don't have a good change management process, you have a lot of unused resources because anyone could just provision resources, and maybe sometimes they forget to shut it down. And most of the organizations we're working with, we feel like they're battling with this underutilized resources on AWS or any other cloud. Liam, anything else you want to add on to this?
Yeah, let's go back to SOC audits. I know specifically this is an area of concern for audit firms where we're thinking about, we've got multiple resources who've got access to deploy changes to the production environment. I have a story where one of my new clients I recently won, essentially the reason they moved away from a larger auditor was because the prior auditor had asked them to slow down and how they were actually implementing changes in the environment. And as I've heard other stories where people are saying, please stop implementing changes during a compliance audit. So that, that's not feasible anymore. The speed of change in the environment, especially in the cloud, is at a rate that we cannot stop and we cannot slow it down. And when frankly, as auditors, we have somewhat got to adapt to that environment. And that's why I think tools and processes like JTs are very helpful. But when we're thinking about how we're going to audit change management in the cloud, we're really looking about who's got access to make changes, and how are we sure that when that person makes a change, it's fully tested and fully authorized. And that can be very difficult when you have 100 people in the environment who can actually make a change, and especially when you really cannot come back to the auditor and say, here's my defined listing of the changes, and here's the actual impact of these changes. So that's certainly an area where we try to work with clients and be very proactive in giving them guidance up front to say, given that we're going to be looking at all of these changes in the environment, can we really understand what's important versus what's not that important? And one of the first steps we do towards our clients, and especially when you're thinking about a SOC 2, we're supposed to have our clients document their evaluation of the impact of any change they make on their commitments to their customers. And that's certainly an area where I know clients struggle, is really being able to step back and take some time to say, am I fully really understanding what this change is going to do, and what's going to have an impact on, how it will impact my customers, and then of course how I document that. So that's certainly something we're looking at. Obviously, in addition to that, you've got the separate environments and making sure that you do have logical separation for your three environments. You're thinking about developing and staging and testing, and then moving everything into production. How have we really controlled that, and how have we documented that? And then have we really captured the necessary approvals? And really, the approval side goes to who is the right person to approve these changes, who is really looking at these, and who can give an informed opinion of should this change actually be made. And I know that we're seeing more and more standardization across these different compliance standards. So moving beyond SOC, when we're thinking about change management, that has an impact on third-party vendor risk management, including the big shared assessments frameworks. You've got now the BSI standard in Germany under C5 that we're seeing more and more clients asking about. You've got FedRAMP and ISO. All of these, even though many of them are very much security focused, they really do have a bent around an area of focus for change management. So we're seeing some, as you say, some unique challenges in this area that we're trying to work with and our clients and providers and folks like JT to get smarter about, so that when we're auditing these things, we're not getting in the way of the business.
Yeah.
And guys, I have a quick question, JT. You spoke about the infrastructure tools that people are using to leverage the cloud. For people that may not be familiar with them, is there any kind of best practices or a way for an organization to know which of those tools may be appropriate for their particular organization?
Yeah, so basically what we see is that if multi-cloud is your strategy, you want to be on Azure and AWS and potentially even Google, we feel like a lot of our clients are using Terraform. And if you don't care about multi-cloud, and if you're just going to run all your workload on AWS, we see a lot of our customers using CloudFormation, and we do help clients with that automation to make sure they can provision resources. using these tools. Thanks, Liam, for that, providing your insight on the change management side of things. And that's why we love working with you guys, because when we went through audits with some of the other firms, it felt like they weren't really compatible for cloud environments. And that kind of brings us to this next slide, where I wanted to talk about how people are trying to do change management in the cloud. Which is like, as I mentioned earlier, you have like hundreds of people making changes. Number of resources are very, very high. So it makes it very, very tough to track all the changes. And people try to do this with spreadsheets, and that's where, Liam, I feel like your team probably end up spending days, and you probably get frustrated, and the client gets frustrated as well. Anything you want to add to that?
Absolutely. Anytime we get a spreadsheet, we get very concerned because trying to validate the completeness and accuracy of anything that's contained in a spreadsheet is nigh on impossible. So anything that comes directly from the system is really where we have to place reliance when we're thinking about the SOC standards. And as I'm going to talk about later, the updates to the SOC audit and auditing standards now require completeness and accuracy testing for information received from clients. At Armanino, we've been doing that for the last couple of years, so my clients will not be impacted, but I know other clients out there from other firms will certainly see that in the next year. And giving a spreadsheet to an auditor is really just going to open lots of questions that are probably unnecessary and time-consuming, and make it very difficult to pass the audit.
Yep. And also, what we see is when you don't have a proper change management process, companies who invest a lot of time in Terraform or CloudFormation type of tools to do the automation, but they don't have a good process for overall holistic strategy to manage all the changes, we feel like the cost continue to skyrocket because there's no process to make sure all the changes are provisioned to the right capacity. And since cloud is so easy to launch resources on the cloud, people continue to launch resources. So that's one of the challenges we see if you don't have a change management process. We feel like, from our experience, when you have change management process in place, it actually helps you to cut costs and at the same time stay on top of the security. Cloud actually makes it super easy. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about next, but I think Debbie has another poll.
I do, yes. Polling question number 3. So again, if you've missed one of the polling questions, make sure you do answer this one. To what degree do you or your organization automate your approval processes? A, there's no automation. B, partial automation. C, complete or full automation. Or D, unsure. And get those answers in. And we'll close the polls in 3, 2, and 1.
It looks like from the answers that a lot of people are on partial automation. So that brings a question to my mind, JT and Liam. Have you seen kind of any best practices or any indication of when an organization should automate the process? Does it relate to size, or is it industry specific, or what makes sense when to fully automate?
Yeah, so Mike, I feel like people do this kind of later on when things get out of control. For example, we come into situations where client is saying, okay, for next 2 weeks, we have an audit coming up, let's just drop everything and just try to implement some kind of change management process. We've also seen some other scenarios where customers are saying, okay, for next 2 weeks, the cloud cost is too high, let's implement some kind of process so we can manage all the changes. So what we've seen working really well with our customer is establishing strong policies from day one. If you're on cloud, you should not wait till things get chaotic. You should focus on implementing change management for day one. And some of the things we've seen working really well for our clients is, like, for example, it's as simple as tagging resources, making sure if any department, whenever they launch resources, the resources are tagged with their department name, and then you expose these metrics to those departments, what changes are they making, how much is costing, and if there is any security implications. And when you provide that kind of visibility, it actually really helps to track all the changes. And one of the things that's really easy on the cloud is the automation. So since there could be a lot of changes that happens on cloud, you can actually automate the day-to-day changes, for example, and have the changes that require approval. You want to cut through the noise and make sure that day-to-day changes are not part. You have an automated workflow for those changes, and implement the process to approve any new changes. And we have also seen some customers of ours who actually implemented change management process using, if you're on AWS, with CloudFormation, and they were able to track every single change back to JIRA or even to ServiceNow. When you have that kind of process in place, it actually makes, when Liam comes in to do the audit, things go really, really smoothly. These guys are in and out. Liam, do you want to touch on this side as well?
On that last point, it does make a huge difference when our clients have a strong process. I know when I speak to certain clients, it's very easy to think about automation as being a solution to everything. And certainly you buy a tool, you put the tool in, and suddenly the problem is solved. And it really is in the area of change management. How do you take a step back and understand what process the company needs to have in place to ensure that all these changes are being traced back and that they are in fact all authorized and approved and made by the right people? So it's when companies have put these processes in place, as I said, it makes the audit much smoother. SOC audits from 1 to 2, any of the other compliance requirements are very easy to pass if, again, the strong process is in place and there's good monitoring.
Yep. So normally the way we see our people implementing this is using, for example, tools like CloudTrail and using automation to trace it back to JIRA. We also have a product that we launched. It's called nops.io. Pretty much some of the things I've been talking about. For example, you can have tag violations whenever someone launches a resource and doesn't have appropriate tags. It can notify users. As changes happen, you can keep track of all the changes and make sure they are in compliance with your company policies. And we can create these rules to make sure every single change that happens is aligned with your internal policies. And we also cut through the noise, and this is one of the points I mentioned earlier. In the cloud, there are so many changes that happens during the day, and these changes are far more than how they used to be for an on-prem environment. So what we try to do is we track all the active resources, and then we allow you to create tickets for them. So that way you can feel good, and you know that every single change you can track it to JIRA, and within JIRA you can see if there were any security implications and how much these resources are costing you. And also, you can look at each user and see how many changes they made last week, and right there you can create JIRA tickets and see how many of those resources are still active. So before I hand it over to Liam, do you want to touch?
Yeah, just on that one, I know getting this report directly from the system, again on the auditing side, to talk about that completeness and accuracy makes it so much easier for us. We're not trying to mess with spreadsheets. We're not trying to understand really what's happened at a core level when it comes to these changes. These are the reports we can take and use as the basis for our sample selections for the audits. As I said, for our clients, it makes it a lot easier to pass.
Absolutely. So before I hand it over to Liam again, I want to emphasize that in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of focus on continuous delivery and agile changes on the cloud. And there hasn't been much focus on the process side of things, and DevOps calls for process, tools, and culture. So what we're trying to solve here is the process and culture side of things. Yes, it's very easy to launch resources. Yes, you can launch thousands of servers just with the one API call, but you still need to have some kind of process in place to track every single change that happens in your infrastructure. And if you don't do that early on, and when you do SOC audits, you end up spending lot of time just scrambling and trying to put something in place just for the audits. So what we're trying to help companies is with the process and culture side of things.
Perfect. Thank you. Now we're on to our fourth polling question. Earlier, we asked you if you currently received a SOC audit. Now we're asking, are you planning to undergo a SOC audit in the next A, 1 to 6 months, B, 7 to 12 months, C, 12 plus months, D, not sure, or E, you said no and you mean no, so never. And again, for those of you who are asking questions or having thoughts, please do type them in. We can answer them toward the end. I'll also be sharing the slides along with the recording of the presentation within the next couple of days. Get those answers in. We'll close the polls in 3, 2, and 1.
And Liam, this polling question brings another question to mind for me. How would an organization know if they should have a SOC audit, or what the indicators would be that they should be looking into it?
So the few primary indicators, firstly, any company that is providing a service with respect to the financials of their customers, those are the first ones that would think about getting a SOC 1 audit. So for example, a payroll processor, a loan servicer, anyone that is forming an integral part of their customer's internal control environment. Those are certainly clients, and customers for us that definitely do need SOC 1 audits. On the other side, anyone that's really managing customer data in the cloud, especially, obviously, where they have responsibility for the security and the confidentiality of that data. Those are typically clients who are asking for SOC audits. The main drivers these days are, quite frankly, trying to do business with either large financial institutions or any big clients that have rigorous third-party vendor risk management processes in place. They're asking for SOC audits before they'll actually do business with companies. So very often the requirement we're going to get is, I have a big client I want to sell into. They won't do business with me until I actually have a SOC audit in my hand that I can give them. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's checklist driven. Their big customer has a checklist that says, from their compliance perspective, they need a SOC audit from anyone they're going to share information with. So from our practice, we're seeing tremendous growth in the area of SOC 2. SOC 1 has been growing, but SOC 2 in the last couple of years has exploded for us. Just the requirements for large customers to have these from any vendor they do business with has significantly grown. So that's where we're seeing the biggest level of demand.
Got it. Thank you.
So now I'm going to jump into the SOC update. There have been some significant updates for SOC 2 and for SOC 1. At a high level, for SOC 2, we now have a new criteria that just came out. So it was issued a couple of months ago. It goes into effect for audits that are essentially going to be issuing reports after December 15 of 2018. And there was a new set of criteria. So they dropped the word principles, which is highly exciting. But in addition to that, and the reason they did that was because they've now mapped the SOC 2 criteria to the COSO 2013 updated framework, which is currently used for SOX clients for financial audit purposes. Because these SOC 2 reports, in addition to giving clients comfort over the security, availability, etc. of data, are also being heavily used for financial audit purposes for customers giving comfort over the internal controls at their vendors. So this new alignment, essentially, you're going to see there's new criteria that are being put in place for SOC 2 audits. Clients can early adopt, obviously means that anyone right now who's undergoing or about to undergo a SOC 2 audit can adopt these new additional criteria earlier. And I know for my clients, as we're doing readiness assessments, we're incorporating these new SOC 2 criteria well in advance of the implementation date of December 15, 2018. The other major update they came out with was they developed a SOC for cybersecurity reporting option. So now, in addition to your standard SOC, you can also get a SOC for cybersecurity where they have a separate set of what description criteria for our clients when they're actually writing up their description of their environment as it pertains to cybersecurity, and also assessment criteria for the auditor. Very specific, again, in that area. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then lastly, they kind of clarified some of the areas around SOC 2 Plus. So right now you can do a SOC 2 Plus and you can include other compliance requirements such as high trust or HIPAA, etc. What they've now done essentially is also said you can opine on HIPAA compliance within a SOC 2 report or compliance with a statement of privacy practices, etc. Previously, it was very much a mapping exercise where you would have, for example, HIPAA controls in there mapped to your SOC 2 criteria, your SOC 2 controls. Now it's actually much more prescriptive than saying, as an auditor, I can opine on my client's HIPAA compliance efforts. So that was a change. So on SOC 2, as I mentioned, they have added some criteria that any client currently undergoing a SOC 2 probably has not addressed. In some areas that are covered somewhat in the existing SOC 2 criteria that are now going to be covered much more rigorously. So the first area is very much new, covering board of directors. So now we need controls that would cover essentially how do we know that the members of the board of directors have accepted their oversight responsibilities, that they have, not only that they have the appropriate skills to be good board members in holding management accountable, but that also that the company identifies ways to ensure that they bring on additional resources to the board when necessary, especially as it pertains to IT and the areas that would be covered in a SOC 2 report. And then lastly, controls to make sure that we monitor for independence violations. The second area, which is really having controls around how do you ensure that the information in the company that supports internal control is complete and accurate and is being disseminated properly. So previously this was very much covered within the processing integrity area. Now we're seeing that as actual common criteria. So how do we know that the data in the system is being captured and processed correctly and being reported to external parties? And then the next three areas essentially, while they're being broken up, cover very much the same thing, which is risk management. So right now in the common criteria, you have one area which essentially requires clients to document a risk assessment. Very often we'll see it can be very informal. It can be essentially a listing of the top 10 risks where they've risk ranked them and they've thought about what risk mitigation strategies they would put in place. So going forward, the SOC 2 criteria is very much more prescriptive in this area. So as you see from the first area, we now have to document and assess risk in the 6 areas that are outlined, which is very different. So for example, if we're thinking about external financial reporting, does the company assess the risk of material misstatement, including have they considered what are the appropriate accounting standards and how have they documented that? And that is very much different than what I would traditionally see in a risk assessment from a client where we really are not going to that level of detail. Fraud is definitely another area where we may see it in a risk assessment, but it was not required. So going forward, we're really trying to document and see this from our clients. How have they assessed their exposure to fraud risk? How are they going to monitor for that? Have they thought about the incentives for their employees and their executives with respect to fraud? And how is that documented? So this area, I think, may be a challenge for clients, given that it does require buy-in from executive leadership, because we really are also thinking about who is doing this risk assessment. So in addition to documentation, who are the folks really sitting around and documenting this? Are these the members that we would think about when we're thinking about the control environment? The C-level executives, the people who really have responsibility at the top for security, etc. And then once we've done this risk assessment, how are we assessing changes? So not only changes that directly impact what we've already captured as part of the risk assessment, but how are we going to think about, for example, changes in leadership? If we have a key member of the executive committee who's leaving, is there going to be a gap which could potentially impact our control environment, and how have we documented that? Again, this is not something we would have traditionally seen in a risk assessment from our clients, so anything that can be done from our clients to get out ahead of this would be very helpful as we're thinking about SOC 2 for next year, or again for early adopters for this year. Another key area in this space is really thinking about our vendor and business partner relationships. So as many people will know, for a SOC 2 report, we can carve out essentially our sub-service providers, saying that, for example, if you host your data on AWS, we're not going to go and test controls at AWS. We're going to get a copy of their SOC 2 report and make sure that they've got appropriate controls in place. But really, for our clients, we now need to be factoring in, what is the risk of having data sitting on an AWS or an Azure or any third-party hosting provider. I know certainly a question to come in around security issues on the cloud, and this would factor into both the risk assessment and just generally talking about our clients and how do they address that risk. Obviously, with the cloud, it brings tremendous advantages, and JT covered many of them when it comes to change management, just the speed that you can move that, provisioning, and making changes, on the fly. But the security issues are very significant when it comes to, you really do have the same level of data breach risk, if not more. You've got, significant capabilities of clients who can have exposure around encryption keys. We've seen in clients where we'll have encryption keys and the decrypting information being stored in JIRA that could be easily searched. So many security issues that we would expect to see now documented as part of the risk assessment as we're thinking about security issues in the cloud. And then lastly, how we developed risk mitigation activities to make sure that if there is a business disruption from a security incident, that we are well prepared to identify, mitigate, and respond from that incident. That also now factors in the use of insurance to mitigate any potential financial risk. And that again was something that was never incorporated into SOC 2 previously. But really thinking from a holistic perspective, how do we really understand if there is going to be a business disruption? How are we going to document, respond, and recover from this?
That is a lot of information. If I'm an executive or a compliance manager, that might make me a little nervous. And so that just brings up the question in my mind. As you go out to different organizations and look at it, how are they prepared for this? Are they normally on track for complying with all of these different things? And kind of a second part to that question is there anything they can do or resources they can go to help them get ready prior to an audit, or if they're not going to get an audit, just want to make sure that they're compliant anyway?
So with respect to the first question of how ready are our clients, some are very well prepared. And I know for my clients, selfishly speaking, we've tried to do some readiness assessments. So when we're thinking about doing a 2017 audit, having discussions with clients around, here are the changes that are coming down the pipe. Maybe we start to think about what controls you could put in place now to be ready for that, because you could early adopt. You could even add some of the controls, but not all of those controls for your 2017 SOC audit, or at least have, advanced preparation before 2018 comes along. I mean, we do have some time when we're thinking about reports that are issued after December 15 of 2018, because many of my clients, for example, issue reports in September and October, but it's going to be here very, very quickly, and there's lots of things to put in place just because of this. Primarily, I mean, the documentation and just the exercise for risk mitigation and document assessment process, that's difficult to do, and it takes time. So there's very much a varying level of readiness for this. Any new clients we're bringing on, we are certainly looking at those controls as we're doing our initial discussions with them. But I know there's a lot of concern out there around really how are we going to get these things in place well in advance of the deadline. Because essentially with the criteria around risk assessment and risk management, if the risk assessment is not done to the level the auditor would expect, then that criteria essentially fails, because there aren't a lot of other controls in that area that would actually mitigate for that. So that's certainly something our clients would want to think about and get ahead of very, very quickly.
That makes sense. And for people who may not have done a SOC audit before or aren't familiar with it, how often do they need to do it? Does it need to be done, recertified every year?
Most clients will recertify at least once a year. Very often what we do is we talk to our clients about when are their customers' year ends. That's really some of the biggest driver. Because if you've got a client who's got a December 31st year end, they're going to want a report that's dated within 90 days of that year end. So for lots of my clients, we're doing September, October, November period ends so that they will have a report in their hand before the end of the calendar year to hand over. But very often, yes, it's once a year. Some clients will do it twice a year. So for some of our larger clients where they have thousands of customers that have varying year ends, they may do it June 30th in addition to another report later in the year.
Got it.
And typically, at least once a year.
Thank you.
And here's another bunch of information on the updates. So these updates mostly pertain to SOC 1, but we're going to see at least information on the subservice organization controls, completeness and accuracy will also impact SOC 2 because we had the updated standard. The old SOC 1 was done under SSAE 16. It's now done under 18. Revision was effective May 1st of this year. The first one here, which is probably the biggest thing for our clients to think about, is we now have to talk about and document complementary subservice organization controls. So for example, when I talked earlier about AWS being a hosting provider, we now have to document exactly what control objective or criteria the activities of AWS will impact and what controls AWS have implemented to make sure that we can issue a SOC report and actually achieve either control objective for SOC 1 or the criteria for SOC 2. And this was not previously required. Essentially, everything was carved out before, and we had complementary user organization controls, but not subservice organization controls. So this is something we're trying to work with clients to get ahead of, because there is some significant thought and effort that needs to be put into this. I mean, obviously, what we are recommending is taking a copy of, for example, the AWS SOC 2 report and going through that and thinking about what controls do they already have in place that you're leveraging to get comfort and actually meet the criteria. But also, in addition to that, documenting what procedures our clients have to ensure that they're monitoring the effectiveness of those controls. Those procedures can range from obtaining the SOC 2 and reviewing it for a large entity like AWS, or for a small hosting provider, or for another smaller vendor. Maybe you have your own third-party vendor risk management program in place. And how do you make sure that those vendors are remaining compliant with the requirements that you've set? So that now needs to be documented based upon 18 for both the SOC 1 and for SOC 2. So that is at least something I think our clients should start working on very soon. Obviously for SOC 1 it's implemented right now, and for SOC 2 we're working on clients right now to get these into the reports. For SOC 1 specifically around risk assessment, we now are going to ask our clients to document an assessment of how they're comfortable that the controls that they have put in place are actually meeting the control objectives that have been outlined in the report. And that documentation is required to be available for the auditor, ideally prior to starting the audit. So this will be, I know for our clients, for example, we have a template we use for that. We give them the sample risk assessment that they can then leverage. But this is another significant effort when they really do have to step back now and take all the control that they've put in place and really reevaluate on a periodic basis to say, are these controls the right set of controls, and do we feel comfortable that they're working properly to actually achieve the control objectives we're setting forth in the report. The next area, and I alluded to this very early on in this discussion, was completeness and accuracy. We've had this in place for years, but essentially the auditor is required to document how they're comfortable that any reports, information that they're getting from the clients are indeed complete and accurate. So for example, when we go to a client, we're testing new user access to a system, we may request a listing of all the new users that got that access during the audit period. We would need to get some comfort that that listing we received from the client is indeed complete and accurate. It's a fairly straightforward process, but many firms were not doing this according to the PCAOB, and therefore they put this essential reinforcement in the standard to say it's now required to be done and to be documented. For completeness, you really are, for completeness as a test, you're looking at the parameters of a report, for example, to make sure, are we really capturing all the new hires for the period? An accuracy test can be something as simple as, are we expecting one name to show up on the report, and does that show up? But essentially just documenting that. But that goes all the way through all of the reports and lists that we would get from the client for a SOC 2, which would include change management. So now that there was a formal requirement to document completeness and accuracy of change management and all the listing of the changes that we get, tools like JTs and the process that JT was talking about earlier is even more important. Because without this, essentially the control fails before we ever start. The last two areas are relatively minor for our clients, but certainly we need to reevaluate the user entity controls. So each SOC 1 report has a listing of controls that our clients expect to see their customers put in place. Before, very often these controls would be rolled forward from period to period. Now essentially we need to just reevaluate these on a periodic basis to make sure that they really are the right set of controls. Because again, the PCAOB was saying, and the ICPA was saying that the controls were not changing year over year, and no one was really taking a look at these. And then lastly, we have a requirement obviously to review internal audit reports. So when I'm going and doing a SOC 1 audit, when our client has an internal audit department or other internal compliance function, we need to read and review any of those reports that may be relevant for our customers' clients or for the scope of the report. Essentially just getting a copy of the reports, making sure there's nothing in there that is contradictory to what we're finding, and make sure we document that. So those are major updates for 18. No major significant differences, I guess, but except for the first one. Talking about complementary subservice organization controls, that would be a longer discussion with my clients. Obviously, we're here to give them guidance on how we do this, but that is a significant effort.
Got it.
And then the last major change that came out with the new AICPA standard, essentially now given the demand and concern for cybersecurity on almost any CEO or any major survey that we see, cybersecurity is top of mind for executives. And so AICPA said we now I think we need a report that actually is an attestation report signed by an auditor to give some comfort that at least an entity has put in a risk management program with respect to cybersecurity, that lives up to the customer expectations.
And I know from talking to a lot of my clients, cybersecurity is top of mind for just about everybody. For-profits, non-profits, every organization we deal with is trying to implement whatever they can around that. So I'm interested to hear what's going on with SOC for cybersecurity.
And we certainly do expect to see some significant demand in this area. What they've done is they put together some criteria that essentially says if we're going to build a strong cybersecurity risk management program, here's what we would expect to see. The criteria essentially saying to our clients, when we're thinking about the program, here are the steps that we need to put in place. The report will look different than a SOC 2 report, so you're not going to see the level of detail with respect to the controls and the testing procedures. But what you will see down to the bottom is our client's description of their program, management's assertion that they've put a strong cybersecurity program in place, and essentially our opinion to say, do we agree with the description and do we agree that the controls are actually operating effectively. But certainly one thing that is interesting in this area, we're thinking about subservice providers, as I talked about in the last slide, which are again, the AWSs of the world that host your servers, etc. There's no carve out for them. So if you're going to build a cybersecurity risk management program, the ICPA is here saying that you are now taking responsibility not only for your internal procedures around cybersecurity, but for all the subservice providers that do work with you. Which really I think also goes to how do we build good third-party vendor risk management programs to make sure that if really you're going to do business with third parties, how do you ensure that they're going to adhere to your cybersecurity risk management requirements and expectations. That is a major change, and that could maybe impact the effectiveness of the report in some respects, because it's going to be difficult for clients immediately to get these reports, whether they're going to take responsibilities for third parties and the programs that third parties have put in place. But definitely with something we're already getting some requests on. But even this we're seeing on the regulatory environment. I know this is new, but the New York State Department of Financial Services, they've got a requirement now for banks and insurance companies where they have to certify every year that they've got a compliance around cybersecurity. And this is just what we believe to be the first of many. Obviously, we're targeting banks and insurance companies and financial services in this area. You've got high trust and HIPAA. Cybersecurity is just going to get much more important as time goes on. As we know that the resources in cybersecurity are scarce, the threats are significant. I alluded to a little bit earlier that the security issues in the cloud, they're obviously significant. But we think this is obviously a great option for clients, especially clients maybe who've had issues in the past with data breaches. This is a great option for them now to be able to say to the customers, we've really now built a strong cybersecurity risk management program, and we actually have some external validation of that program. So that's some of the demand we're also getting as clients who really have had issues in the past that are trying to demonstrate that the things have changed.
I've noticed that some smaller organizations are more concerned now, because in the past it seems like a lot of the breaches have been with the large organizations, and they have invested so much into their infrastructure and putting together their cybersecurity program that the bad guys are now going after the smaller organizations. So I'm seeing that with a lot of my newer clients, startups and things like that.
Unfortunately, we used to say to clients that some of the best defense was anonymity and size, because if you were a smaller client that didn't have credit card data, PII, you were not a target. But now we're seeing indiscriminate hacking, looking for any kind of confidential information, intellectual property, in addition to the jewels of credit card information, social security numbers, etc. So smaller clients who may not have the budget to implement major cybersecurity programs are getting attacked on a constant basis.
Yeah.
So security obviously being an ongoing concern, this is a great option. The other thing here is you can also, in addition to this, you can have a separate report, or you can leverage the existing SOC 2 for covering security, availability, and confidentiality to also get an opinion on your cybersecurity program. So there's two ways you can get to this. I know the AICPA in developing this, they are trying to react to market demand, because they're currently working on a SOC 2 for vendor risk management as well. And that's under development, so we should see those standards coming out here pretty soon. So I know that the exciting world of SOC 2 auditing isn't going anywhere. The market's growing, demand is growing. Working with folks like JT and his team have made it a lot easier for us on our side, and implementing clever solutions that not only make control environment stronger, but make it easier to pass an audit. I think will be more and more valuable as time goes by.
That's great.
Perfect. And we've got a few minutes for some questions. But quickly, I'll review what we've kind of talked about today. So we've reviewed why change management is important when implementing cloud solutions. We've discussed real-life examples of how effective change management can support a comprehensive and adaptive approach to SOC compliance. And we've outlined the recent changes to SOC 1 and upcoming changes to SOC 2 compliance. And with that, we'll take some questions. I know that Mike had a few kind of lined up as well, so while you're entering those, we can have a quick chat.
Yeah, I think probably the first one I had, this was one I had coming into this before it even started, was if there was one piece of advice that either JT or Liam could leave with listeners, when they're thinking about change management and SOC compliance, what would be the one thing you would want people to leave with?
As I mentioned earlier, I think people really for when things actually get really bad. Change management is something you should implement right away in the cloud. And with the help of, just because cloud makes it super easy to automate things, so you can actually do it, but I feel like people do this at the last moment when they're going through some kind of audit, and they really scramble, and that's when they end up wasting a lot of time. So this is something you should do day one when you're moving to cloud, because the cloud environment is such a dynamic environment. There's so many people making changes, and that's why sometimes even small organizations are getting hacked, because it used to be that you had only one person making changes, and that person knew what the infrastructure looked like. Nowadays, infrastructure is anyone could provision resources, and that's why anyone could. Anyone is vulnerable for all these security issues. So my suggestion will be to implement this, as soon as you start migrating any workload to the cloud.
I think similarly on the SOC 2 side, it is getting started early. When we work with startups, when they put the right procedures, controls, etc. in place early on in the company's life cycle, they're much more successful. It's much less expensive to put the right controls in at the start, rather than suffering a significant security incident or audit failure at the end. So again, it's really thinking about these things up front. I mean, the information's out there. There's lots of documentation on what are good controls, what do they look like, how do you implement them. And really thinking about this early, I think, is very, very helpful.
That's great. And then the only other one, we've kind of touched on this already, but I think I want to ask it again just because it's really important. What specific industries impacted more than others when it comes to SOC or high trust compliance?
For SOC, technology, obviously, anyone that is hosting and has significant customer data that they need to be protecting. Financial services is a very large area for us. Healthcare, obviously, we do high trust compliance. We're seeing more demand for that. You can do a SOC 2 for high trust is certainly an option, but financial services, healthcare, technology are primarily the areas that we're spending most of our time.
Great. And then, lastly, if people from this call are going to think about implementing any of this, what kind of qualifications or certifications should they look for in a provider when they're selecting somebody to help them out?
For a SOC audit?
Yeah.
Obviously, the ICP have a list of registered firms. You need to be a CPA to do a SOC 2, but beyond that, that's really all you need. When we're talking about high trust, obviously there's a listing of high trust assessors that are available on the High Trust Alliance's website. Now we're one of them, thankfully. But there are some very specific requirements for that. When you think about FedRAMP, you need to be a third-party accredited assessor for them to do that kind of work. So they're very, depending on what you're trying to do, there's always a list out there of people who can do this for you. But essentially, it's trying to find the right firm that fits the culture, that's willing to work with the client, really help them through this. I think the days of the old school auditors where we would go in and beat them over the head is hopefully going away. But now we're trying to partner with our clients much more effectively, give them guidance, help them through the audit. Obviously, while maintaining independence and doing a very good, strong quality audit from our side. But thankfully, as I said, I think things are changing.
That sounds great.
And with that, I think we can wrap it up. If anybody has any questions, obviously feel free to respond to my email. I'll be sending out the slides for the next couple of days, or you can reach out directly to Liam, JT, or Mike. Thank you guys for joining us today, and thank everyone on the line. We look forward to seeing you at a future webinar, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.